Okay, Jagadish, we start.
Okay. Thank you, Comrade Peter, for accepting this request to discuss the current very critical situation that has emerged since the victory of Modi and BJP for the second time. I definitely, on behalf of the section, I would like to thank you for this accommodation, even though we know you're very busy.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to discuss with fellow socialists and Marxists in the Indo-Pakistan subcontinent, and the events there are not important, not just important for the region and for the country, but is also important from a world point of view because of the role of India now in the world constellation of forces.
As you know, this victory of Modi and BJP, which happened after a very communal and polarized electioneering campaign, in the backdrop of a, in fact, even though it is termed as a skirmish, but in fact it was it had all the characteristics of a small war between Pakistan and India, and Modi used it to the hilt. So that helped Modi to really increase the vote share, which would have otherwise would not have been possible, from 31% to last time to 38%, a 7% increase in an all-India level. But apart from that, in the key North Indian states, especially in 9 states, the vote share crossed more than 50%.
Yes.
And even in the bastions of the left, the rightward shift is conspicuous. It's not decisive. This is an unprecedented mandate in the history of independent India.
Yeah.
The question that I would like you to look at and answer in the context of above situation that I just explained, is it right to say that India has been taken over by far-right politics, which very much in line with the trend elsewhere in the world that is happening right now?
Well, there is a certain parallel with what is happening in Europe with the electoral success of far-right populist parties, but it's not exactly the same. It's for the special circumstances that exist, in our opinion, in India, and moreover, it's really a triumph of hope over the experience of the Modi government in its first period in power, because it failed even according to its own lights in terms of poverty, of eliminating poverty in terms of economic development, and really no solution of the accumulated problems of India, which has been there for generations. And Modi offered a new path, a new turn, and so on. And as you say, there's an element in this election of the personal power of Modi and the illusions in Modi, trying for a temporary historical period, but in my opinion will not lead to a drastic change in the situation. It certainly is not a triumph politically and socially for the far-right policies that he's put forward, because it's against the background in India, in Asia, and so on, and the world, of all the intractable problems of capitalism inherited from the previous period, which are now going to be compounded by the onset of a world economic crisis in the next period that will particularly impact on what we would call the neo-colonial world, on the economic developed areas of the world, which is what India still is. And as a result of that, this will be a temporary historical moment, a moment in history that will not have the far-reaching consequences, either that Modi believes is the case, which will allow him to consolidate his regime, nor will it bear out the very pessimistic conclusions of many other people, really on the left even, where they've seen the bastions of the left, as you pointed out, falling under the spell of Modi and of Modiism and the seeming Hindu wave. This is a temporary phenomenon. The key question is the working class can be thrown back by this. The Indian ruling class, the landlords and the capitalists can go on the offensive, but it will lead to a recall. We have to remember, in the relatively recent history of India, we've had massive general strikes. And that will be on the agenda of the workers' movement in the next period.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of what is happening at the moment, Modi and his cohorts are preparing for a new period. In fact, BJP and Modi call this the new India. And also they boast, like their counterparts elsewhere, they say that this parliamentary democracy is about to complete 75 years of existence in India, and both the ruling classes here and elsewhere, they try to showcase this as the best example of democracy as a stable institution. But of course, they often compare this with Pakistan, Bangladesh, and even to Sri Lanka, and pronounce that Indian democracy is stable, at least in electoral terms, in the current situation. And Modi, as you said, Modiism, what is in India called as Moditva, is going to usher in a new India of unseen progress and unheard of success. So in that context, how stable is India's democracy as long as the social democratic tasks are far from being completed, especially when at least 40%, in fact it is more than that, of India's 1.34 billion languishing in absolute poverty. Is it not right to say that the instability is built into the very edifice of India and the bourgeois capitalist rule?
Yes, and really India, tens of years after independence, 1947 till today, in a favorable period economically in the 1950s, and a relatively favorable period of a recovery from the crisis of 2007-8, in the period when Modi's been in power, this has been a relatively favorable position. But the essence of the matter is, despite the electoral fireworks that Modi happens to have sparked in relation to the last election, despite that, the fact is that the fundamental problems, not of socialism, not of the kind of living standards we think is possible on the basis of a democratic socialist planned production, but on the basis of the bourgeois themselves, the bourgeois democratic revolution has not even been completed in India, which is really a thoroughgoing land reform and land to the tillers of a certain development economically. Yes, a development is taking place, but it's very spasmodic. There are islands of development, which is in a sea of poverty and economic stagnation and so on. And that will not change. And now there's an element, because he was able to use the conflict in relation to Pakistan and give a favorable image of what India represents at the present time. But there's a large element of Bonapartism. There always has been in the situation. That is the personal power of Modi and of the government. The government seems to have concentrated enormous power in its hands. Modi himself seems to have concentrated enormous power with a so-called clean image throughout the whole of India. But all that is done is to concentrate all opposition forces on the government and on Modi himself. And therefore, there'll be colossal upheavals, not just in India, but of course throughout the neo-colonial world and in Asia and in the advanced industrial countries. I mean, we have the phenomenon of Modi in other countries. For instance, we had it in Brazil with the colossal economic developments that took place in the course of the last period up to the crisis of 2007, 2008. And now Brazil is mired in backwardness, and we had the return of Bolsonaro with his mad ideas of autarky for Brazil, of identity politics, of dividing the working class. And the consequence is that there will be an enormous radicalization, and a radicalization will inevitably take place, and it will be compounded by the onset of a new world economic crisis. So this does not represent, this represents a high point for Modi, for the Hindu nationalism, and so on. And all the forces of opposition will move into gear in the next period.
Peter, in our pre-election material in the last couple of months and even a year, we have said that Congress, the earlier party of the big bourgeois, Congress is in a terminal decline, which unfortunately is proving to be correct at the moment. Yeah. We in the past argued that the left is trying to take its place as the B team, take the place of Congress as the B team of social democracy. But then the recent trend in the last few years, particularly since 2011, when the Communist parties lost West Bengal, goes to show that left too is irrecoverable from its long-drawn debt, especially as it is clinging on to its old shibboleths of there is no alternative to capitalism, progressive bourgeois theory, lesser liberalism, etc., etc. With this situation, what international examples that can throw light and are comparable to the current Indian situation that can show a way forward for the regeneration of the left in general and for the genuine Marxist forces in particular? Yes. I'm asking this question in the context of complete disarray amongst the left. Has the possibilities for a revolution thrown back for an unforeseen period? Is it a period of reaction engulfing the continent, or India at least?
No, I don't think it is a period of reaction. In fact, as I've said, that Modi is plowing the ground, and his whole actions while he's been in power, and others as well, including the actions of the Congress Party, have plowed the ground, and there have been more than one opportunity for the working people, that's the working class, and the poor peasants to take power, at least on a state level in India. That's in a period when there were powerful communist parties with the potential to mobilize the masses, as you've mentioned in West Bengal. But one of the phenomena is that because of the theoretical and political decay of the communist parties, really, of Stalinism, and we're looking for a solution within the context of capitalism. Now we had the phenomena where in West Bengal, I believe, that the Communist Party, some of the Communist Party cadres went over to the BJP as a means of security for themselves. And now the task in India is to recreate new workers' parties, probably on a state level to begin with, and the opportunities will be there. Because one thing is certain, given the character of Indian capitalism, and given the character of the working class, working people and the poor peasants will inevitably resist the onslaught of naked capitalism. And we need to repeat, the bourgeois in the West, the capitalists in the West, are terrified politically of the coming economic situation that is likely to develop. They've already discussed how we can put in place a political alternative that can siphon away the anger of the masses in some kind of new social democratic left variant. For instance, like Roosevelt in the US in the 1930s, where you have the Financial Times predicting that there will be inevitably social explosions. They used the phrase the other day of the tumbrils of the French Revolution beginning to be mobilized to frighten the bourgeois. And we had, of course, the example in the US of the ruling class should be afraid of the inevitable uprising of the American working class. That's why elements of socialism, at least, are appearing in the program of the left in the USA. Now, that's happening in an advanced industrial country. In the neo-colonial world, where the economic situation is much more tenuous, where capitalism does not have a real future, despite the fireworks that appear to have taken place. In the next period, it will be a stormy period of upheaval. I've got no doubt that the masses will fight. They've got no alternative but to fight against the deterioration in their conditions. The key question is, will they have a party and a leadership in power, or a leadership that can be built, that can develop the potential to lead them in struggle? And you mentioned the development of left parties elsewhere. Well, we have the ferment in the US at the present time, in the so-called left of the Democratic Party. That doesn't offer a lasting solution to the problems of working people. People like Bernie Sanders should break from the Democratic Party and form a workers' party. We've had in Europe, remember, alongside of the new right-wing populist parties, we've had the turmoil within the Labour Party in Britain over Brexit. There's not so much a split in the ruling class in Britain. There's a splintering in the ruling class, with the Tory party, which is the most successful electoral machine in Western Europe in history, is now in the process of meltdown, with up to now 11 candidates for the vacant Tory party leadership. That is a symptom of the underlying crisis of British capitalism. At the moment, the masses don't appear to be moving, but they will. They have moved. For instance, in the Corbyn phenomena, that at the moment is stalled because of this problem of Brexit. Or, for instance, of Podemos in Spain. That also is stalled because it moved towards the right. We need new mass workers' parties, but we need them of a special kind, not to immediately then begin to look for an opportunist way out. And that means that the socialists and the Marxists of India and of the whole subcontinent have to raise this question of new mass parties of the working class and engage in this, whether that comes with a new party or whether it comes, for instance, in an upheaval in the communist parties, what remains of them, and a nucleus out of that can be formed. That's the way the working class will move in the next period. It's not a question of wishful thinking. It's not a question of us saying, well, we hope that this will develop. It will develop. It's not dogmatism on our part. We've seen it in the recent period. It's now a little bit in a blind alley, but this is a temporary phase. It will be changed on the basis of big events, big movements of the working class, and particularly of the new generation that will fight against all the limitations and all the evils of capitalism in the advanced industrial countries, but it's a catastrophe for the masses in the neo-colonial world, which includes India.
Peter, many liberals, like elsewhere, many liberals and academics in India argue that seeing the situation through class prism will take the left/Marxists nowhere. Though they attribute this fault to the CP left, but hardly any time in history the communist parties have had an idea of class perspectives. They argue, the liberals and academics argue, that India is a country of various identities. Hence, it is important that we pursue community politics. This is nothing but identity politics in a different name.
Yes.
They want us to believe that the class antagonisms doesn't exist. Instead, it is gender, caste, language, region, nationality, etc. While we can't reject the existence of these hard realities born out of the incapacity of the bourgeois landlord classes in developing society, but at the same time, making any concession to these identity arguments is like a self-goal or a hit wicket. So the question is, so what would be the program? A transitional one at that will pave way for clarification of this complex scenario thrown at us. One, from the failure of the bourgeoisie Second, the pernicious legacy of Stalinism and Maoism internationally as well as in India.
Well, that's a very good point, because it's not for the first time in history that the theoreticians of the bourgeois have attempted to conjure away the class struggle. They had a certain basis for these arguments in a period that I've lived through in the 1950s, when we had the greatest boom in history, roughly from 1950 to 1975, when the wealth of the world quadrupled, of the advanced industrial countries increased 4 times over, when even the working class got concessions of the very rich table of capitalism and real living standards increased. That came to an end in the crisis of 1975, and since then we have had an oscillation between ever deeper and longer crises and brief periods of prosperity when the previous economic situation was not restored. Now, that's the best situation that capitalism has been in. And inevitably, it's not a question of agitation or of propaganda. It's not for us. We don't base ourselves just on the idea of calling for a class program or of agitating to change society. It's an objective reality. The class struggle takes place irrespective of the class warriors, irrespective of Marxists or of Trotskyists. It takes place, it would take place if we weren't there. What we do is we give it a program, a perspective, and the necessary tactics in order to mobilize the working people. And then, of course, to use that power to effect a change in society. So they can spill as many words as they like. India is a class-ridden society, as is Britain, as is the rest of the world. Now, what the bourgeois have tried to do in the last period, and not just in the neo-colonial world, but throughout the capitalist world, including in Britain, is the curse of identity politics. Is to try and convince, which is really another device, particularly out of the universities of the USA, which are kind of ideological factories of the world bourgeoisie. In these factories, they've concocted these theories of identity politics, where the starting point is what difference there is between working people and not what unites them. Identity is very important. The struggle against racism is very important. The struggle against women's oppression, for LGBT plus liberation, all of those things are important. But the difference between us and the proponents of identity politics, we fight for all of these oppressed sections of society, but we link it to the unity of the working class in struggle. Because only the working class, by unifying all the movements together and fighting to change society, can actually solve the problems of the most oppressed layers in society. That applies to caste. For instance, in the Indian subcontinent itself, which is a terrible legacy of the underdevelopment of India, and really the fact that it's not yet moved onto the road of modernity, which it can't while it's controlled by the iron hoops of capitalism. So our task is to free the working class from all alien ideas which prevents them from uniting against the common enemy, which is the capitalists and so on. I mean, we recognize, for instance, in India, that the bourgeois democratic revolution is not being carried through. For instance, the right of self-determination is a crucial demand for India, because India really is made up of a series of nationalities and of subgroups as well. Within those nationalities, wherefore satisfying all those demands. But it cannot be completed. It will not be won on the basis of capitalism. It's only on the basis of a socialist confederation of the Indian subcontinent, beginning with India itself, that you can satisfy the right of self-determination of all the oppressed minorities, of the oppressed castes, and so on, and abolish casteism, and open up a new modern, which we would say would be a socialist society. That's the only way forward for India. The question is, how do we get there? And I would emphasize the need for class organizations fight against this attempt. What is communalism except another form of a division amongst working people? The only way is to unify the working class through the trade unions. That's the most important unifying organization, and revolutionary mass parties which unify the working class in action.
Peter, I mean, you did touch upon the question of the crucial question of national question. As you said, still one of the most complex issues that faces the region is of national question. Given the rightward shift, not just in economic sphere, but also in the social aspects, in fact, Modi could win this second term, not because of his scoring performance in the economic sphere, but in spite of the dismal failure there. Yes. He used jingoism and warmongering nationalism to sway the voters. Given the deep divisions in the society and the animosity against Pakistan and Islam, and with the scenario of a full-scale war, though it can be very dreadful but cannot be ruled out, and another factor that needs to be counted in is the question of alienation of the oppressed class. Modi may inadvertently fuel the balkanization of the country. Is it not? It is not this jingoist turn of events is a new phenomenon. Previous regimes of Congress have tried this, but as traditional bourgeois representatives, they knew the danger too, that it can cause, especially in a country of such diverse populations. BJP's guiding ideology and its mantra of Hindu Rashtra, that is Hindu nation, this victory or the mandate gives a different narrative to nationalism. Earlier under Congress, post-independence India's nationalism was rhetorically anti-imperialist, but BJP's has a different meaning. It's fundamentally anti-minorities, advocating one nation, one religion. So in this background, has Indian state reached a point where balkanization is seriously posed?
Well, you could not rule it out, but it would not necessarily just develop immediately in one act. But nevertheless, you put your finger on the problem of the BJP and why it will compound the problems of India, because India is made up of nations. In fact, as you know from your history, at the time of the occupation of British imperialism, India was not a nation in the classical sense of the term as we understand it today. It was made up of different nationalities. And even after independence, the obvious division between Hindu and Muslim, which the British encouraged, and which then at the time of independence criminally assisted in the partition of the country and so on, all of those legacies of the economic underdevelopment of India and the cultural and social underdevelopment have been inherited by the very weak Indian ruling class today. And the idea that you can suppress a huge minority of the Muslims. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there are as many Muslims, if not more, in India than there is in Pakistan. And then to the same time, to be involved in persecution of the Muslims, which inevitably will trigger upheavals with Pakistan, including a new war, as you said. Now, actually, this is the element of Bonapartism in Modi, where he can stoke up nationalist sentiment, a safety valve against Pakistan, an anti-Muslim situation that could get out of hand and could result in a new war. And who knows where that can end. Out of a war, by the way, it's no accident that war has often been the midwife of revolution. It's not just a question of aggrandizement on behalf of this power or that power. Out of a war, particularly a failed war, where there's a defeat. That's what happened in 1905 in Russia with the Japanese-Russian war. And it could happen in the case of India or of Pakistan, of a provoked war which goes wrong, and then the political repercussions can pose the question of revolution. But I have to stress the precondition for us abolishing feudalism, abolishing all the heritages of the pre-capitalist regimes, which is holding India back, with all the discrimination against minorities and so on, no right of self-determination. All of them are a danger to India and a danger to the Indian subcontinent, and the only force that's capable of leading the nation or completing the bourgeois democratic tasks, which is the unification of particular entities, Pakistan in the current case, India in the other, or of complete right of self-determination for those nations who believe that they are oppressed by the greater Indian state. We inevitably raise that as part of our program. All of those demands are essential, but they need to be linked to the idea of fundamentally changing the political situation through the development of a mass workers organization. Then, of course, the question of the program is posed in that respect.
Last question, Comrade Peter. I mean, as you know, BJP and RSS, their approach is based on the arithmetic of caste, religion, region, language, and gender. This is because, you know, with this, the opposition also falls into the same trap, including to a very great extent even the CP left in one way or the other. This is because behind its one Hindu nation slogan, it can hoodwink all these identities that I mentioned. But what BJP and RSS fears most is the eruption of anger at the deep class divisions in society. Behind its facade of Hindutva lies its desire to have a Hindu bloc without class divisions, where it can hide its real nature, its own class interest, that of capitalism. Yeah. Again, because of casteism, or the vestige of feudalism, in fact, it is more than a vestige, this is overwhelming, in fact, which has never consciously fought, which has been never consciously fought by the bourgeois. Instead, the bourgeoisie, for their own narrow ends, have nurtured it in various ways. And even their piecemeal solution of reservation, that is positive discriminations, have not even touched the surface, let alone solve it. But now, the monster of casteism has itself become a stumbling block for a united struggle against capitalism and landlordism. Identity politics, as you mentioned, of all kinds, is festering to the advantage of reactionary forces. You did mention the question of trade unions, the question of the way to fight, the kind of door through which we will fight this, and unify the class. But on the ground reality is even the sections, great numbers of the trade union who are in struggle are also infected by caste divisions in the society. The poison of casteism is there. So we cannot overlook that. In that situation, what is the transitional approach program in such an imbroglio of a situation in relation to caste and class? Because it is overlapping, vice versa.
Yeah, well, we are implacably opposed to all forms of discrimination and divisions within the working class, and the caste system and casteism is obviously a terrible blight on the labor movement and the working class movement of India, and is an obstacle to the fusing the different aspects of the struggle in a common struggle against landlordism and capitalism. And there's no shortcuts here. I mean, there's a problem now in the developed world, in Britain and elsewhere. We have the problem of racism, which is a searing problem. In Britain, for instance, in the USA, the legacy of slavery and so on. We've had it in Britain, and I've given examples on the previous interviews I've done with you about the way that we approach this in relation to the situation here in Britain, where we organized a movement called the Panthers, the UK, which was linked with fusing together different sections of black youth and Asian youth into a very powerful movement where Bobby Seale came over here and participated in the activities of that situation. And we even went to the extent in Liverpool where the council there had a very progressive employment policy which took on thousands of young black workers with the agreement and the support of the trade unions, and done in an even-handed way, which got the support of the whole of the workforce. So the demands, the transitional program will vary, or the transitional demands will vary depending upon the concrete situation. But our starting point, is, I repeat, is to oppose all divisions in the working class, to fight for the unity of the working class, and how that's put forward in a concrete situation, that has to be worked out on the ground. You can't do that from a distance. You have to have an understanding of the movement, of how it's developing, and so on. And I'm confident that in the next period in India, despite Modi, and because of Modi, because of the provocations of the Modi government and the regime, and that element of Bonapartism, which is like personal power, it's kind of making the government stand above the contending forces in the parliament and in society. It's possible that on the basis of Modi blundering in this situation, which he inevitably will do, that there will be opportunities for a socialist and a Marxist force to make inroads particularly into the new generation, and to imbue them with a class and the socialist alternative, and an opposition to all programs and measures that seek to divide the working class and emphasize the interests of one section as opposed to another. For instance, in the US, it used to be called sectional politics. Right from the beginning, there was a history of that. In Britain, there was also a sectional struggle before the development of industry. But what did capitalism do? Capitalism unified the working class in big industry. That's the whole essence of capitalism. And the necessary collective consciousness of the working class developed through big industry. Small, isolated workshops, and scattered consciousness can develop. Even there, based upon experience, the masses can come together through trade unions and fight for an alternative. That's the future for India. Let those communalists and those sectarians fight for a different road. They will build on sand. They won't build a sustained movement which is capable of seriously challenging landlordism and capitalism in India, throughout Asia, and indeed throughout the world.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, that was indeed the clarification that you gave on very important points was like a beacon of light. I think we will do things in a more confident way. Of course, as I said, not that ourselves, but the entire left is in a disarray. And hopefully this video will also go outside of our ranks through YouTube and other social media, and we will gain more strength and also start the organization against, not only against Modi's regime, but the capitalism itself. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jagadish. Bye.